and you would kind of fly into the point of injury, resuscitate, do whatever's needed, fly them back out again. We essentially put up tents in an old tanning factory. Your theatre bed was a stretcher on a wheelbarrow. We were getting hit so often. When Martin Bell and Kate Adey turn up, then you know it's a bit dodgy. So I then specialised in blast and ballistic injury. There's a long-term effect to trauma that people don't really get. Bosnia was a SAM-2 missile that was fired into our camp. So I got shrapnel in my back. Big gust of wind shifted the helicopter and I got the tail in my neck and the skid in my lumbar spine. But I enjoyed my sport, thought that was all gone. Ended up on the Paralympic development kind of squad. I went over to the States for the Warrior Games and then more recently Highland Games. So I think I'm only one of 2 people to successfully toss a caber from a wheelchair. I mentor startup companies. I teach at a couple of universities. With my physical injuries, psychological injuries, you could easily give up and have a rubbish life. The only person that's going to affect is you.
This week's guest on the Debrief then is a former member of the Queen, I can never get the QARANC, I call it, Queen Alexandra's Royal Army Nursing Corps. There you go, that's a mouthful enough for you. David Dent MBE, how are you, buddy? You all right?
I'm very good. Yeah.
Cool,
nice to be
right.
here.
I'm going to take you straight into this, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and sort of like unpick who you are, right? And we're going to start with David Dent when he was small. Where you from, and what did he do when you was little?
Yeah. So, I always kind of think normal childhood, but then you talk to other people.
Is there such a thing as a normal childhood?
Not that normal. So, well, lucky enough to still have my parents around in their 80s, but kind of bit of a military tradition in the family.
Okay.
So my dad was in the Royal Scots for 30-odd years.
Wow. What rank did he get to?
Major.
Oh, wow. Okay. So he went all the way through. So he started off as a bod and then...
Well, he started off, funnily, national service.
Okay.
And then...
That's topical at the moment as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think he got promoted to Lance Jack and then... left and because he'd finished his national service bit and then decided he really enjoyed it, so signed up and then went to Sandhurst and
so you was a pad brat then, really?
Yeah. So all over the place, and both his dad and my mum's dad as well were Second World War veterans. So
okay, do you know who with? Did sort of like,
so it was my mum's dad was Pay Corps. And he was, during the Second World War, he was over in North Africa.
Wow.
And then...
He might have paid some of my old lot. He might have been David Sterling on his payroll.
Yeah.
David Sterling on your payroll.
Quite probably, yeah. So, and then I can't remember which... It was one of the county regiments, because there used to be so many during the Second World War. But, my dad's dad, he also got injured in Belgium. And then... kind of shrapnel injury, got brought back home, and then he went back to farming, which is kind of what he did before.
Okay.
So I kind of was born over in Jamaica, so my dad was posted over there.
That's a posted Jamaica.
I know.
I never got nothing like that. Hereford.
I know. Well, it was because it was 1966, so... Jamaica just getting independence, and so basically they needed somebody to train the newly formed Jamaica Defence Force.
Oh wow!
So that was his job, to go over there and set it up.
Yeah,
and,
that's quite a cool job, isn't it?
Yeah, it was really good. And the Prime Minister of Jamaica died at the time, so he ended up doing a ceremonial duty with this guy lying in state on a train being taken round the coast of Jamaica in the boiling temperatures, and
he got a fair shift then out there.
He did, and the Queen came to visit that year as well. Wow. So there was quite a lot going on. So just in Kingston, which is where we lived. Yeah. Just kind of on the hills up towards the mountains. And then I didn't get to the UK till I was about 7, so we were posted to Germany from there. So that was a bit of a culture shock going into the freezing German weather. And then it was because it was Royal Scots, so it was either Edinburgh or somewhere else. And then Cyprus, when that happened in 1974.
Back in the sunshine.
Archbishop Macarius got assassinated. And, we were living out in a
Does he
hiring...
do this on purpose? Does he?
I know.
Just cherry picking.
Yeah. Well, there was a good stint in kind of Bielefeld and Munster and British Army of the Rhine, that kind of stuff.
That's right. Yeah.
But yeah, Edinburgh was the other kind of bit. So on and off, growing up, in that. But we were, the regiment and the families were all evacuated from Cyprus.
Yeah.
So that was an interesting kind of, as a young lad.
Yeah, that must be quite a thing, because that's an upheaval for an adult. But when you're a kid and you're like, that's your schooling, your mates, the whole lot. Just off you go.
Well, you were kind of going to army schools a lot of the time anyway. And then, but yeah, we were in convoy getting evacuated out. We were kind of locked in the houses for like 3 weeks when it all kicked off because we weren't in a base.
Did you understand the gravity of it then as a kid?
Not
it was just sort of like, this is a laugh.
Yeah. It was just like, why are people wandering around with guns? That kind of stuff. And why do we... somebody's delivering the food and it's compo rations basically and tins to the door because you couldn't go out the shops. And then convoy back to Episcopi.
Okay.
And they had a lone piper on the road piping all the trucks coming in with the families.
Always room for alley-ness, isn't there?
Yeah. Turkish jets flying over the top, and then
Well, that's some of that.
Yeah, and
that's
then
the
a 7-hour Hercules flight back to the UK.
Yeah, that's pretty honking,
which was not. Yeah, it wasn't very pleasant. So and then it was kind of a bit more normal. So, but yeah, sort of army brat.
So how did you do at school? Because presumably you went to quite a few schools, didn't you?
Yeah, and in the end, I mean, I was falling behind with school, to be honest, and going to the army schools just because we were being posted so much.
Yeah.
So back then you could get like a boarding school allowance. So you could send your kids to a boarding school, and they thought I'll get a more stable education. So I did all right for the kind of O-level stuff, and then rugby, girls, the usual kind of distractions, and then didn't
absolutely.
do so well in the next bit. So although I got further like academic qualifications, I didn't do that till I was later in life and had to.
So what first got you thinking, I'm going to sign up here, I'm going to do something? I mean, obviously you've got your family's steeped in military history, but what was it for you that said, right, I'll tell you what, I'm going to have a pop at this?
Well, it was funny because like most young kind of men, I didn't want to do what my dad did. It was going to be a bit obvious to do that, so I wasn't going to join the army. And then I went to work in the health service and started my nurse training. And I just liked the interesting, challenging bits of that. So I ended up doing bone marrow transplantation in the early days, stem cell transplants, that kind of stuff, and then intensive care.
Yeah.
And then I just kind of thought, this is not challenging enough. You just rock up for your shift and then go on, and then thought, okay, well, I can go straight into the Army Medical Services without qualification and get to do that stuff in more interesting kind of challenging circumstances. So it's always been, I'm always kind of faced with a challenge.
Did you join up as an officer, did you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you have to go to Sandhurst to become?
Well, you do what was called the Vickers and Tarts course. So it was because you're not
just learn how to use your knife and fork.
Yeah, exactly. But a lot of the trades, because you're not soldering. You've obviously got to be. You're a soldier first, but you're there for whatever your other skills are. So it's a shortened course basically. Yeah. But you still do all the kind of the basic.
Square
infantry
bashing,
stuff, square bashing, that
couple
kind
of
of
section
stuff.
attacks and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So the Padres are quite funny because they give them a pickaxe handle rather than a weapon.
Well, they gave me a pickaxe handle when I went to Kenya. I wasn't allowed a weapon over there.
Yeah. So then it was the kind of Arnhem, Farnham, Crookham and Fleet rotation for a bit. So Aldershot, and we used to have military hospitals. So Cambridge Military Hospital was in Aldershot.
And did you specialise in anything in particular once you became a nurse? Did you? Or did you...
Yeah, so intensive care. So and then later on, I did war surgery. We also did this thing where you could train people who had intensive care qualifications or theatres or A&E, that kind of stuff. You could do a shortened course to become a GP, basically. So, but just for the military. Yeah. So they used to call them regimental medical officer assistants. Okay. But you got an extra 6 months of prescribing, diagnosis. But your war role was battlefield trauma. So I then specialised in blast and ballistic injury. Okay. And then that was a lot of my war role was resuscitation and battlefield trauma.
What years were you?
Through the 90s, basically. Yeah, I kind of came out in 2000. Yeah, April 2000.
So did you get any tours under your belt in that role?
Yeah. So Bosnia was my first one. Okay. So the year my son was born. So we were up in Bogojno.
Okay.
So we had a kind of brigade headquarters at Gorney Vaucouth, and then we had a kind of company location.
Yeah.
Because it was a bit different to how traditional fighting had been, because you had these little enclaves and everybody was everybody, and all around you. So we had a location there where we had a small surgical facility, but still nothing like you had in Afghan. They'd started to bring in porta cabins, but we essentially put up tents in an old tanning factory. And your theatre bed was a stretcher on a wheelbarrow. You put a bit of plywood in to stop it bouncing about the place, and your ventilator was a gas bottle.
Was it fairly busy tour? Were you getting quite a few people through?
It was. I mean, there was a time that you kind of always knew that there was one bit where it got really kind of busy, and we had to thin out basically because we were getting hit so often.
Yeah.
When Martin Bell and Kate Adie turn up, and Malcolm Rifkin was the Defence Secretary, when they all start turning up, then you know it's a bit dodgy. So that was quite interesting, because we had like a Sergeant's Officers' Mess, which was a porta cabin, basically, with a few slabs of beer. And those folks came to visit. But Martin Bell with his white suit and his little suitcase, he was quite funny, because he used to take his little suitcase to the toilet with him, because he said, like, one time he didn't, and basically half the building got blown up, and he didn't have anything to report his stuff.
Did you meet Kate Adie, did you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've met Kate. She's all right, isn't she? I spoke to her a few times. She was at my wedding, actually, funnily enough.
No, they're really nice.
Yeah, they're easy going, aren't they?
Yeah. And they were in a position to kind of tell a bit more of the real story, because the conditions weren't great. The boys were sleeping on cardboard, on concrete floors, and paraffin heaters and all that kind of stuff. So it wasn't, and it was kind of minus 30 going over the winter. So it was.
So outside of Bosnia, where else did you go? Did you get?
Northern Ireland. The other kind of big tours were Northern Ireland, which I did Armagh and twice in Belfast, Girdwood and White Rock.
But they're busy places as well, aren't they?
Yeah, and my last one was 99, where you ended up doing more than one job. So Armagh was more looking after the towers, looking after your kind of medical facility, but you're also doing, trauma cover, and Belfast was med cover for bomb disposal, and which was interesting as well, because we didn't have green troops on the ground at that point, but still, ATO was quite busy.
Yeah. All
so
sorts
you were
of
out
stuff
there.
turning up. So, what prompted you leaving the military?
Basically injury.
Okay.
So
tell us a little bit about how and when and why.
So the first one, and I think it's one of the things why I talk about these things, because there's a long-term effect to trauma that people don't really get. And I'm lucky enough to be in that position where I've done the soldering bit, I've done the medical bit. You've got a kind of 360-degree perspective. But Bosnia was a SAM-2 missile that was basically fired into our camp and kind of took out half the building. So
and you presumably
I got caught
took
up
a
in
little
that.
bit of a slap from that.
So I got shrapnel in my back. I got kind of concussed, and
what were you doing at the time when it went off?
We were just doing our stuff.
Camp?
Yeah, basically.
And all of a sudden, boom,
yeah.
And then it comes.
And I mean, you had no notice of that, at all.
No, of course not. No.
There was some folks on the roof, and the QRF were out and about, but there was people who used to kind of snipe into the camp anyway.
Yeah.
And they had this sort of strange habit of, if things were getting hairy on the kind of front line, they would lob mortars in, or they would do something with the camp, because we could then call up down to the Adriatic and say, can we have air cover?
Okay. So
and then everything died down a little bit.
Yeah.
But they used to use it as like, it's getting a bit difficult for us, let's mortar the
Okay, so
camp.
you're taken out by this thing. You're the medical geezer, and you're now the one who's been taken out. How did that fare? How did that pan out?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was just, I don't remember a lot of it, to be honest. I mean, they just kind of took the big bits of metal out and scrubbed your back down with betadine and things like that. And then I thought I'd recovered.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until kind of 7-8 years later, I started getting couldn't feel my fingers properly. I got kind of numb patch on my abdomen, started tripping up, this kind of stuff. And it turns out that what happens with blast injury, particularly, is it's like a shockwave that goes through your body. And if you're in a building, it does it multiple times. And depending on the density of the tissue, it causes damage in different ways. So your lungs are full of air, so you can get blast lung. Other tissues are a bit more fluid. But with your brain, the middle of your brain, the grey matter is more jelly-like.
Yeah.
The white matter, which is your nerves conducting, is a bit more tough. And what happened is that basically this micro tearing of these nerves ended up with just like frayed wires, essentially. And then as you get a bit older, everybody loses a bit as they get older.
I mean, that's really interesting in as far as right now, myself included, has been exposed to a number of blasts.
Yeah.
Yet there's no obviously signs with myself at the moment, touch wood, do you know what I mean? But there must be a whole generation of soldiers now who have been exposed to limitless amounts of blast. Some have picked up shrapnel, some haven't picked up shrapnel, some have sort of like, you know.
But it is even a small one. So even if you've stepped on an IED, that's not a big explosion because it's designed to take your leg off and clog up the logistics and affect morale and things like that. And that's why some of that kind of warfare bit they're not designed to kill you, basically.
Yeah.
But they've done some studies where even those smaller blast injuries, I think you've got double the likelihood of PTSD. Later on in life, early onset Alzheimer's, early onset Parkinson's disease.
Is that the effect it's having on the brain, is it? So
And the nervous system.
Obviously, they're finding out stuff about Parkinson's and Alzheimer's all the time, aren't they?
Yeah, and a lot of it is to do with inflammation, but also you kind of see the stuff that's happening in football and American football as well with this traumatic brain injuries.
Boxing. It's obvious in boxers, isn't it? Do you know what I mean?
You see people like Muhammad Ali, and you can see, he got Parkinson's. Yeah. You see some of these rugby players who have motor neurone disease. All of this stuff is connected, but there have been studies that show that you've got a much higher likelihood of getting this stuff if you've been exposed to kind of explosions. So it's the long-term consequence. Yeah. And I think when young lads, if you're 22 and you've stepped on something in Afghan, you're not thinking about that. You're thinking about your prosthetic and you're thinking about that. You're not thinking about when you're 50 or when you're 60. Yeah. But also health service planners, all these kind of folk, they're we've concentrated on that older World War II generation, but actually there's a cohort of people like you and me that are coming through that are going to likely need some extra support as a result of their service.
Yeah. So you said the first time.
Yeah.
What was the second time?
So the second time was so there was just some little scrapes and things like that, but the second one that really kind of finished me off was actually in Northern Ireland, and we were evacuating a casualty up to the hospital because I was down in the sticks, and we kind of had the helicopters that we could transport people in. Anyway, it was really bad weather, a bit like we've been having the last few days. Just getting the casualty out of the helicopter.
What kind of helicopter was it?
I think it was a Puma.
Okay. Yeah.
So we had gazelles, we had the little gazelles, and then
that's right,
Pumas and lynx.
Lynxes were out there, yeah.
Anyway, big gust of wind basically shifted the helicopter just as we were at the kind of side gate, and I got the tail in my neck and the skid in my lumbar spine, and I fractured like 3 vertebrae here and another 2 here.
Did you realise straight away I'm in the shit here?
Yeah. I mean, it didn't do my cord or anything, but I basically got these transverse fractures. So the discs had gone in my neck and my lumbar spine. And when I saw a spinal surgeon later on, they was basically saying because the way these are angled, normally they would jack open your vertebrae and put a bit of concrete or some artificial disc in. Yeah. But basically it would just slip and cut your cord. So I now have permanent kind of nerve pain as a result of that. So I have this kind of chronic pain all the time. Yeah. And there's not a lot you can do about it. So that was kind of index, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the realisation hits that you're not going to, your career's over, basically. What happens then? What's your mindset? And what do you think? How can I get around this now? Do you know what I mean? Because you obviously you've got to keep going somewhere, haven't you?
Yeah, and I think this is not different for any soldier becoming a civvy. I mean, there is that kind of, you've had everything there served up on a plate for you to a large extent.
What rank were you, by the way? I didn't touch on the rank.
I was a captain then. I was that kind of acting major in Northern Ireland.
Okay. Yeah.
But mainly because for the marching stuff and the ATO stuff.
Yeah.
But the that kind of, my perception of what Civvy Street was like was probably quite strange. So I kind of saw the commercial world as this big scary place that was cutthroat and all the rest of it. And I thought, but I could do that. I got my management skills and then thought, well, they won't let me practice the medical bit anymore because of my brain injury. It's probably not that safe. And then the physical side of life was getting worse. So again, you can't really do your
So at this
stand-up.
stage, when you got out, could you walk?
Yeah,
then?
yeah.
So you could still cut about.
Yeah. And I think the thing is, Phil, that a lot of people use wheelchairs more for kind of getting about. So I don't have a spinal cord injury, so the legs kind of work. But what happens is, because of that nerve damage, you get inflammation. And like I was saying to you before, I've got pain all the time. So pain's not an indicator for me because it's there as a constant.
Right, okay.
But what I find is like the hands swell up, or I start to get like spasticity where my fingers kind of curl in, or really painful one is getting spasm in your intercostal muscles, where basically the kind of ribs just bunch up together and that kind of
Like
stuff.
A cramp. But
And then choking because I lost my ability to swallow properly. So I had to get retrained in terms of swallowing and, but I would choke and pass out. But the more you use your limbs, the more it sets up the inflammation. And then there's this inflammatory cascade that then causes effects on your brain, on other parts of your body.
There's almost an argument that we had to say, right, just leave that alone.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
So apart from, falling over, but I mean, 70% of people that use wheelchairs can get out their wheelchair.
Yeah.
So I think there's a bit of a misperception with, with that anyway. You see kind of these.
The perception isn't really. It's more with people that are able-bodied that look in, because I literally assumed you can't walk. That's why you're stuck in that. But it's not. You shouldn't be walking because it's going to make the whole thing worse.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's quite. I've learned something there already.
Yeah, but the inflammation is damaging in itself.
Yeah.
So you don't want to have all those inflammatory markers running around in your body.
Yeah.
Because it just continues. It worsens the damage. So yeah, it's a little bit preventative, but then I would get exhausted. If I was trying to cut about with crutches or whatever, I'd be exhausted by about an hour. I wouldn't be able to speak properly. I wouldn't be able to swallow.
Okay.
Just that whole thing just happens so quickly.
Yeah.
So if I need to do whatever I'm doing or my job or sport or whatever, I've got to kind of tone it down a little bit.
Okay.
Which goes against the mentality of just.
So work-wise, how did you find that? You intimated that you were going to struggle now because you weren't be allowed to do that. You can't be allowed to do that.
Yeah.
So now you're trying to get a square peg into a round hole, isn't it?
I went into pharmaceuticals, so because I thought, well, I've got a clinical knowledge, and went into the kind of commercial world of that, and I think the difficult thing was you come out of the military, nobody understands what a soldier's rank is when you hit Civvy Street.
No, civvies don't care. They genuinely don't care. Do you know what I mean?
So. And I was having a chat with a full colonel that left recently and trying to help him get a job, basically. And he was like, yeah, but I tell them I'm a colonel. And they're like, yeah, so what? I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter whether you're a private soldier or whatever. Everybody has the same struggles.
Yeah, no one cares.
Yeah. So,
basically.
And you have to translate that kind of skill set into civvy language, essentially. But all that leadership, management, organisational skills, a lot of that just doesn't happen. So just showing up with that right mindset actually puts you a cut above the rest anyway.
Yeah.
I think the challenge for me was you had to go right back to the bottom. And every time I've changed role, I've kind of gone back down to the bottom again and worked my way up.
Yeah.
So you don't have any equity that you can translate across through things. But yeah, I mean, it was interesting. And it was still, the first bit of my career in the health service was looking after patients. In the military, I was doing the same, just soldiers that were injured. And you would kind of fly into the point of injury, resuscitate, do whatever's needed, fly them back out again. And then pharmaceuticals was providing the treatments, and now I work in clinical research. So we're developing the new drugs and treatments of the future that will come 10 years down the line. So it's all been so centered around kind of patient care at the end of the day.
Okay.
Yeah.
In your normal everyday today life now, you do a few other things. You do a bit of sport, don't you?
Yeah.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, it was funny because I had to go into spend a month in rehab for physical injury, and I kind of thought I was we're all fit in the army, right? But I enjoyed my sport and did some martial arts, played rugby, this kind of stuff. Thought that was all gone. Thought that was all finished. It's like, oh, bloody wheelchair now. And then somebody said, oh, why don't you try disability sport? So I live in Scotland, so I went to Scottish Disability Sport, ended up on the Paralympic development kind of squad, and that was quite interesting because, you know, I thought, what sport do I want to do?
Yeah.
And they're like, no. What we do is we measure you, get you to do a whole load of drills, and then we'll say, you're not going to be a rower because you're only 5'8", and you're not going to be a whatever because you're only this. So they literally kind of measure your whole...
They tell you what you're going to do.
Tell you what you're going to do. So I got onto the development pathway for archery for GB to go to Tokyo. But again, that was another decision that I had to make, that I had to give up my job, basically, if I wanted to do that full time, and I wasn't kind of prepared to do that because still I've got 3 kids.
Well, you've got to look after yourself.
You've got to earn a wage.
Yeah, of course.
You know. So I then kind of did more of that recreational stuff, you know, competed, Scottish Disability Sport.
And that was at archery, yeah?
No, I mean, that was like, I did everything from wheelchair racing to field athletics to that kind of stuff. Then went with some of the veteran sports stuff. I went over to the States with the Warrior Games over at Quantico, where the Marines are based. Came back with a bronze medal for the shot put.
Oh, okay.
So that was really pleased with that. And the Americans really look after their veterans, I think, better than we do, to be fair.
They're on another level, aren't they?
Yeah.
And everybody, you know, lots of people I know that have been over there see it. Civvies, funny enough, see it as
Yeah.
well. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I speak to civvies and they go, they don't look after you here like they look after over there. Do you know what I mean? I get that all the time.
Yeah, because we got invited up to the Capitol building, you know, guests of the Speaker of the House, had a little kind of show around, that kind of stuff. And then more recently, I was competing over in Israel with the Israeli Defence Force folks. There's a charity called Biet Holachem, and they have these great rehab centres. I think they got 4 in Israel, and Israel's only the size of Wales, you know.
Yeah.
But all their veterans, because they all do national service, obviously, all their veterans can kind of use the facilities, as swimming pools, as gyms, all that kind of stuff. So we had a week of sport, and they coincided it with a mental health conference as well, around PTSD and veterans' mental health. So it was a nice kind of thing that we were all together, but they were doing something good with that as well. And then more recently, Highland Games. So
yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. It's something. So yeah, the team I compete with is called the Wounded Highlanders. Jim Holburn, who's another ex-para guy, really good lad. He kind of helped set that up. And initially, the perception of Highland Games competitors was like, we don't want a bunch of disabled people because, you know, we all look strong and tough and,
you're all
that kind of
porridge
stuff.
Box, isn't you?
Yeah. So there was a bit of kind of resistance. And then we found some friends up in the north, up by John O'Groats, who wanted to have us there. And then 2019, it officially became a para sport in the Highland Games.
So what sort of things do you do?
So I do, they do this thing called weight for distance. So it's like a kind of weight on a chain, and you swing it around your head and you chuck it, shot put or Scottish shot.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether it's just because it's a new sport or I'm half decent, but anyway, I got the world record for the shot put.
Wow.
So but I think it's pick a sport where not lots of people compete. But it is competed in. I mean, it's big in America, big in Canada, you know, various places in the world. So, and then I think the one that people are most shocked at is tossing the caber. So I think I'm only one of 2 people to successfully toss a caber from a wheelchair. You know, getting it the full 180
It's got to
over.
go over and it's got down the other side, isn't it?
Yeah, because normally people are kind of running at it, or they're walking towards the thing, moving forwards, and then you flip it. Whereas I get somebody to put it in my hands, and I'm just sitting there, and I have to do it all from shoulder and, you know, toss it up. So I'm quite proud of that bit.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah. Is it the similar sort of caber as what?
It's well, they have a women's caber as well as a men's caber. So it's still about 2.5 meters, 80 kilograms.
They're lumps, aren't they?
They're still a big lump of wood. Yeah.
It would still take 10 paratroopers to carry it.
Exactly. Well, it's funny, we were competing up at the end of last year with 3 Scots up at Fort George. And some of the young soldiers couldn't do it, basically. So the PTI basically was like, Dave, would you come along? You know. So I then tossed the caber. Some of these lads who were active service were like, oh, we better up our game.
Yeah, you better get on that thing. You are remedial caber tossing. That's what you're doing.
Yeah, it was a bit unfortunate because 2 of them ended up in remedial PT because I did the shot put from a throwing frame further than they did stood up.
Wow.
So you could imagine the PTI wasn't happy.
Yeah, absolutely. So have you done Invictus games and all that sort of stuff?
No, I've never kind of. It's always been a combination of. I've been for the tryouts quite a few times, but never kind of got through really.
Okay.
Or I ended up being busy doing something else.
Yeah,
on a couple of occasions.
You've got your family in that to consider as well. So how old are your kids?
So Callum's 28, Rachel's 26, and Becca's 21.
Okay.
Yeah, so they're all one at home. Callum's married, so they all kind of live nearby.
Yeah.
So yeah, doing very
What
similar.
about your mental health? Have you ever suffered with your mental health?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Yeah, I do suffer with PTSD, and I think this is. It took me a long time to kind of get to grips with that, and I think that is more challenging than the physical stuff, to be honest with you. And I think it's
what are your like signs and symptoms of that? Do you know? Does it come and go? Is it?
So I never knew that I had. So a lot of people are, first of all, they're diagnosed late because they don't realise. So sometimes this doesn't kick in for like 5-10 years.
Yeah.
For me, I was just getting really angry with stuff. So short temper, shouting at the kids, slamming doors, that kind of stuff. I mean, other people end up, getting into fights and things like that. Luckily for me, I didn't kind of take it that far. But things like not really having any regard for yourself and your personal safety, doing stupid stuff like driving too fast or, arguing with people for the sake of arguing, picking a fight, that kind of stuff. But it was interesting. So I went to see this psychiatrist. He was a really nice guy, and I hadn't had it really explained to me very well before. And, he was saying, your job as a medical person, when you're flown out to somewhere where, there's a firefight going on and you're resuscitating somebody, you're concentrating so hard on your clinical job because that soldier needs you. But at the same time, people are shooting at you and you're relying on all the other people around you to, keep you alive, basically. Your fight or flight response is saying, get the hell out of here, but your kind of mental capacity is overriding that and saying, no, I'm here to do a job. Yeah. And basically the two act in opposition and something snaps somewhere. There's a guy called Professor Steve Peters who's written a book called The Chimp Paradox, which is fantastic. He's a forensic psychiatrist consultant, and he coached Chris Hoy, the British cycling team, Manchester United Football Club, and it's all about how this kind of fight or flight response comes from somewhere called the amygdala. And it's so hardwired into your basic survival safety stuff. It acts quicker than your thinking brain.
Yeah, that's an animal instinct. The fight or flight is something that would have been programmed into every animal on the planet, isn't it? It's one of the basic, the sort of like basic ingredients of an existence.
Yeah. So you think about your job, and you overcome that by just training the hell out of it. Yeah. And so then that becomes instinctive behavior. And the same thing is, it's training, it's muscle memory, it's, just doing your skills and drills time and time again. But still there's a consequence of you not running away because that's your job. And then that kind of features. And then obviously, sometimes, sadly, trauma is so bad that people don't survive. I mean, even in a civvy healthcare system, 30% of people that go into intensive care don't live. They've had a fatal event, that we're just keeping them alive. Well, in the military, that's similar. If someone's been shot in the head, your survivability is not kind of high. You've got to kind of, you've got to deal with that. And the difference as well is you've been eating 3 square meals a day with these people. You're bunked up with these people. They're not some stranger that's come in through an A&E department. You know them, they're your friends. That then takes a higher kind of toll, So
you put an emotional spin on it as well.
Yeah.
You're right.
And the emotional bit drives a lot of our kind of feelings and things like that. So I think for me that, the other thing I think about soldiers, particularly men with PTSD and trauma, is that they're not having a good time. They don't see the future. they see themselves as a burden, particularly to their families. And I was there, it's like, you'd be better off if I wasn't here type of conversation. And then they say, no, we wouldn't. I'm like, yeah, but if you're gone, then people will be sad for a little while and they get over it and move on. And, life's all a bit bloody difficult. But you need somebody outside of that to say, no, you're talking nonsense. But people who don't have that, and people isolate themselves. And you can see that, I think a lot of suicide, veteran suicide, is really driven by people thinking that they're doing a good thing by not being there anymore. It's not, I'm so sad. It's just like, I can't put up with this. Let's just, find a quick exit.
And it is a huge problem.
It's massive. It's massive. I mean, I think, whether it's, double the population in prisons, a much higher suicide rate, homelessness, a lot of that is driven by isolation, mental health, substance abuse kind of comes into play for some people.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people medicate with alcohol, drugs, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and it's brutal.
Gives you a short-term fix and a feeling of, this is great, but then it's actually not, is it?
And it's just forgetting about stuff. It's just taking yourself out of that world. So I think for me, treatment-wise, I didn't like the medication because it kind of makes you all drowsy and all the rest of it. So it was a couple of things.
That's a problem in itself, isn't it?
Yeah.
If the medication is going to make you feel under the weather.
Yeah.
Why would you want to take it? Do
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Because you actually, again, it's having an adverse effect on you.
But some people need it, right? So there's, in clinical terms, like depression can be a what's called affective, caused by circumstances. Some can be your brain chemistry, with a lot of psychiatric diseases. And the trouble is, once you get into a mindset of depression, whether that's a clinical depression or an affective depression, you actually change your brain chemistry. So you start to be and behave chemically in a depressive state. And so you've almost got to kind of work your way out of that to change the physiology of your brain to get better. And that takes a kind of lot of hard work. So there's this kind of stuff of fake it till you make it. So the psychiatric folks would say, stop running away from stuff. They call them move away behaviors and start moving towards things. So what are the things in your life that you want to be positive about? And whether you can't be bothered, don't feel like it, don't whatever, just do it and keep doing it. And then eventually you'll kind of realize, actually, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is just stop reacting to stuff, because one of the things that I found with the pain side of life was I use this kind of mindfulness techniques to help manage that, because I have pain. So just put that to one side. What does that pain do? So for most people, it drives their behaviors, it drives their thinking, it drives their emotions. So instead of being sad about it, you make a mental choice to choose, yeah, I've got this, but I'm still going to get up and I'm still going to do my day and I'm still going to do whatever. And it's just sore. Or like a sports competition, this is really important. I know I'm going to be absolutely buggered for 3 days afterwards because I'm going to really push it. But that's a consequence I'm prepared to take for a positive reason to do something. So, you do find, people find emotions well up and you start to just notice, somebody says something, you get annoyed, like, oh, I can notice that now. Why am I going to get annoyed about that? Just let it settle down. Make a conscious choice. So it's putting a conscious step in there. And that kind of stuff. I mean, it's all mind games, but it works, Do
you think having a medical background has helped you with a lot of this stuff?
Yeah, massively.
Because I think a lot of guys and girls that get these sorts of problems and have no medical training whatsoever, per se, it's daunting to them.
Yeah. Well, you don't know what's happening, is the first thing. So it's scary. And you don't have the perspective of, what does the future kind of, things change. Nothing is there forever. Even the bad things are never there forever. Even if you lose somebody, you'll still be sad about it, but you will get on with life. And there will still be good things that you can enjoy, and you don't have to feel bad about enjoying them because that person's not here anymore. And that's kind of quite a tough thing. I think it gives you that perspective. But also, I've always been somebody that likes to kind of understand the physiology of what happens. And it kind of helped in the military because it's silly stuff, tricks that you pick up over the years. It's like if there's a big explosion, first thing we would go do is, you're marking people up with airway, breathing, circulation. Are they priority 1, priority 2? But then you look in their ears, because the same pressure that ruptures an eardrum is the same pressure that causes blast lung.
Yeah.
So if I go around and check everybody's ears and I see somebody's got a ruptured eardrum, I'm going to intubate them and ventilate them fairly quickly, because if I leave it another hour, I'm not going to be able to ventilate them.
There's a good chance that they've done something.
Or you're out in the cold, you're trying to put a Venflon in somebody's vein.
Yeah.
It's all shut down. Being able to kind of put a tourniquet on just so the pulse comes through. All of that kind of carbon dioxide is a vasodilator. So the vessels just open up. So you can easily cannulate somebody. So you just end up picking up these little bits, and because you understand how things work. So I've always been somebody that wants to understand, lift the bonnet on it and see how it works. And then I think talking to other people about that then helps them, because then they kind of trust you a little bit, because you sound like you know what you're talking about, whether you do or not.
But I think my advice to people who think that they're going under with mental health is to talk about it to someone, anyone. Just to get it out there, start talking about it.
Yeah.
Massively keen to encourage people to say something about what's going on
And I
them,
think
to someone.
I see it's changing, because it used to be you're not tough if you've got a problem, weak mind type stuff, and that goes back to kind of World War II. But now that people realise that it's a courageous step to be able to do that, and also put yourself in somebody else's shoes. So if I saw you were suffering, I'd turn around to you and say, Phil, come on, I'll take you. You need to have a chat with somebody. Talk to one of your mates. Talk to me. Talk to a doctor. Whatever. Yeah. Just be that friend to yourself, because we treat other people. The concern we have for other people. And if you say that to somebody who's suffering with their mental health, okay, if it was your mate that was in the position that you're in, saying what you're saying, what would you say to them? And then suddenly they go, "Oh, tell them to get some help." I'm like, well, get off your what's it? And
Yeah. Take your own advice.
Yeah, but I think people are talking about it. Male suicide is a huge killer. Yeah. Not just and it's worse in the veteran community. So the more we talk about it, the more people realise that there's light at the end of the tunnel. Because I think, reasons I come and talk about things is because, with my physical injuries, psychological injuries, you could easily give up and have a rubbish life. The only person that's going to affect is you. So you can get through that. You can get through blast injury. You can get through traumatic injury. You can even, do a successful job using a wheelchair. Doesn't mean it's easy.
No.
And I think, having a disability, there was some interesting work done recently where they did a confidential interview, and a third of people that were offered a job in the UK, when they found out they had a disability, they withdrew the job offer. Without telling the person. So it's more difficult to get a job, if you have a disability. So the more people see people being successful, doing stuff, contributing, and say, well, that it's not a problem. So maybe I'll give that person who uses a wheelchair or with a prosthetic a job.
An interesting. Yeah, it'd be interesting to go back and ask some of these people, why didn't you give them the job?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. But I mean, it's just, I think the thing that worries me, Phil, is that bigotry's always been there,
Yeah.
I think I said at the beginning I was born in Jamaica. I remember meeting somebody. I didn't get a job, and I'd put Jamaica on my CV, place of birth, because you used to have to put that stuff down. This guy came up to me later, met him at something a couple of years later, and he said, "Oh, if I knew you were white, I would have given you a job."
Yes.
And I'm like, okay, I'm glad I dodged that one.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But I think
If I'd have realised you was how you was, I wouldn't have applied for
yeah,
this donut.
Yeah, exactly. But I think people are wise enough to not say those things in public. But there's still a proportion of the population that are bigoted.
I think you're 100% right.
Yeah. They just hide it well.
Right. Yeah. But you can't bluff the bluffers anymore. Can you? So you know, don't you?
Yeah, but there's a whole thing. They call it virtue signalling.
No one's ever going to admit to that, but there's definitely a current of it.
I remember trying to talk about meet a veterans champion at one of the councils.
Yeah.
I said, but we can't speak to you in person because that would discriminate against people who are not veterans. It's like, have you read that thing?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, I think they're trying to look at it's meant to be, to stop the disadvantage. So if you're posted back from wherever and you're trying to get your kids in school, or you're trying to get a dentist, or you're trying to get a whatever, that stuff, people are still being disadvantaged. But, I don't get any kind of priority treatment or anything like that. And it's all assessed on clinical need. But they've got this system where you can say, I'm a veteran and, I need physio because I, bust my back as part of my job. And they're like, yeah, but you still can't get it. So, so you're right. It doesn't actually seem to make a
It's the same
blind
as the
bit of difference.
PTSD thing. As soon as you mention PTSD, a number of civilian types, they'll just go, nutter.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And even if they don't say it as blatantly as that, they're thinking, is he going to smash my head in?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? That's what they're thinking.
The other thing about PTSD is and I talked about this not so long ago because there was a bit of a campaign on it. When you see a veteran on a TV show, be that Shetland or whatever it happens to be, they're all ex-SAS, they're all PTSD, and they've all got a weapon that they're going around causing merry hell with. The more they see people like you and me who are living constructive lives, helping other people, who also happen to have had this in their background, then you're not all mad or bad and dangerous.
Yeah, the media never help with any of this stuff. They never help when they portray a completely different image because it fits the narrative that they want. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
but this is why your stuff is brilliant because, people see normal people, just been through some difficult stuff, but still are living good lives.
And wanting to progress with life.
Yeah.
Which I've always said, the majority, 99.999% of people that served up did enough to get through basic training and actually wanted to progress in their life.
Yeah.
So they've got that in them.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? That's an indicator from the bat that you've done probably anywhere from 6 months to a year of hard graft to get where you wanted to.
Yeah.
So that means that person is a capable person.
Yeah. And also a lot of people, you take your average soldier, a lot of them have come from more difficult circumstances than an average population elsewhere. So they had that get up and go at 16 to become a boy soldier or whatever it happened to be, come out of that difficult circumstance and go do something. And then the army's helped them or whichever arm of the service has helped them kind of get there.
Yeah.
And, that's been game changing. I had a nephew who's just retired cousin, Paul, he just retired as a WO2, helicopter kind of engineer.
Yeah.
I remember sitting him down at 15. He was in and out of trouble. He was getting lifted by the cops. And I'm like, you either go down this route or join the bloody army.
Yeah, this is why organisations like the MPTC are so good because they're sort of like they're saying, right, all right, you might have achieved nothing in school for a number of different reasons, not necessarily even because you're thick.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because you just didn't fit in with their narrative at school. So, but now we can say to you, right, come with us, do this.
Yeah.
Have a look at that. Do you know what I mean? And then some of these kids are going on to do really, really great things.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and it's just given that mindset to excel.
Yeah.
And it's not popular, but training hard, doing the right things in the right way, being respectful, just battering on through and keeping your head down, that you don't see replicated in lots of other organisations.
It's not on the curriculum at school, is it anymore?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? They do enough to survive, enough to get by. There's no discipline. There's nothing there.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? They're not allowed to discipline for a start, so it's a completely different deal.
Yeah.
And so when they turn out the kid at the end, he's either fit for purpose or he's not. And if he's not fit for purpose, it may not even be his fault.
Yeah.
But he's just off you go then. You know what I mean? And then you wonder why they get in trouble.
Yeah. So for me, I think the military's it obviously does what it's meant to do.
Yeah.
Protect the country, but it does so much more for society. And I think the more society is divorced from that military ethos, and we have that risk now because, apart from battalions over in Estonia with the RAF, and when Afghan's quiet, you have these kind of lulls and things, and it goes out of the public consciousness, and then that's when the defence cuts come in. And nobody understands it.
Grant Shapps is saying we don't need these Marines, we don't need these ships. You do.
You
absolutely do. Do you know what I mean? And we're down to 75,000 people as it is.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And then,
well, I was talking to somebody. One of the regiment's jobs is to supervise and train foreign soldiers. So they're not even boots on the ground. Their whole role is supervisory. That's just saying we don't have enough people. I'm worried about that.
That's what these Ranger battalions are doing, though. Basically, they're disappearing into places like Mali and all these West African hotspots and training.
Yeah.
Because they can't deploy with them along. They can't even go alongside them. They haven't got the manpower to do it. So they've just got to keep a repetition of people going out into the field and training other people's soldiers.
But we don't learn the lessons. I mean, the Army Medical Services got screwed over with options for change in the 90s because
that's right.
We stopped training doctors in the military. So because we stopped treating soldiers' families, basically, because it was to save money. So you can't train a doctor without doing paediatrics and maternity. So they then all disappeared into the health service for 2 years to finish their training, and then half of them didn't want to come back.
No, of course not.
You know, and then, you know, even for me.
Yet when you think what the military have brought in terms to the medical world, the advances that have been made through the military are
amazing.
Absolutely phenomenal, aren't they? To
Yeah.
the point, you know, you speak to some of these crews on ambulances now who are going, we're actually keeping people alive who technically should have died about half an hour ago.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean?
But I mean, that over in Bastion, that using fresh frozen plasma for trauma instead of bags of red blood cells massively help, because if you give too much red blood, you know, it causes other kind of toxic problems to the body. What you actually needed is the clotting factors and all the other bits that are in plasma.
Try and
to stop
keep it in, as opposed to replace it. Keep it in, yeah, exactly.
And now that's being used in the health service.
Yeah, all those advances have been made through.
Yeah, but in the Falklands, you know, there's a guy called Jim Ryan who was professor of military surgery, you know, when you get shot, there's a difference between high velocity and low velocity. So you get shot by a pistol, it's not as much of a problem. With a high velocity injury, what happens is the round goes through and it causes a vacuum behind it. So the tissue gets sucked in. But what then that causes is this micro tears for tissue about various distances apart. So I remember treating a guy who was in Africa who got shot in the abdomen, and it ruptured his diaphragm and his liver, which was 10 centimetres away. You know, I'd seen somebody shot through the leg, didn't hit the bone, but it fractured their femur. So this force is really big. Now, you go back to, like, Crimea, all these people are dying of gangrene. It's because somebody got shot, we used to just stitch it up, you know, whereas what Jim and others found in the Falklands was don't stitch it up, because it all looks like pink bleeding tissue. 5 days down the road, that's black and dead. You just can't see it yet. So you pack out the wound.
You're sewing in the badness.
Yeah, all that necrotic tissue, and then people are dying from it. So you pack it, look at it in 3 days, pack it, look at it in 5 days, scrape all the rubbish out, and then survivability is massively improved. So, you know, I think, we got a lot to owe those advances in, certainly in trauma care, because you don't get to see it. When I was training in battlefield trauma, you know, we got sent to Afghan with the Red Cross before Afghan started, and then over to the US, because a US ER was having about 4 or 5 gunshot wounds a day. You know, we weren't seeing any of that, you know, so we had to go and get that experience, because you need to kind of understand.
Same as the lads used to do the Isle of Man TT and that, because they were getting so many complete, you know, trauma cases over there. It was worthwhile them sending them over there, wasn't it? Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely. And I think it makes a big difference. And, you know, the other thing is that, you know, kids, I mean, I've treated kids in a battlefield situation, you know, like Bosnia, for example, where, you know, somebody lobs a hand grenade into a town square. You know, I remember this one 3-year-old who had a through and through chest wound, and you know, she didn't stand a cat and hell's chance. Now, the lad that was a full screw was, you know, on the section that was out on the ground, just scooped her up, chucked her in the back of a Saxon with her mum, who'd also had a shrapnel injury, and her sister was also injured, and just brought them back. But we were scaled for adults. We were scaled for soldiers, so we didn't have any kit to treat a 3-year-old. Yeah, I mean, that's a cannula size, the pharyngeal airway.
So I ended up getting a nasal tube, taking a Portex connector off, putting Black and Nasty around it so we could intubate this child, because we didn't have the right kit. So you end up that adaptability and, you know, things that but you need to know how to treat kids, because kids are really difficult for trauma, because they're
smaller for a start.
Well, they're smaller and they're not just little adults. Their whole physiology is different. And the other thing is that they decompensate really quickly. So you'll see this if, you know, suddenly, like, mums or dads at home with a small child that's got a viral infection, then suddenly they become unresponsive. So they, like, keep a plateau there, and then suddenly they go down. Well, this kid basically was, the blood that was in her chest was splinting this artery that was bleeding. So as soon as we cracked her chest open, the splint was off and she just bled out. And it happened in like 2 minutes because she didn't look as sick as she was. So if you don't have that experience of treating pediatrics, even as a military person, you're going to end up with these negative consequences. You know, and I mean, she would not have survived that in the end, but still it's always difficult to see when it's right in front of you. Yeah, and you're the one who's trying to do something about it.
Absolutely horrible. So, right now, what are your plans now? What are you up to now? What are your plans for the future?
So I don't know. I'm getting older, so I'm kind of retirement's not too
How
far
old are you
away.
now?
57.
Oh, okay. All right, yeah,
Yeah,
a couple of years older than me.
Yeah. So no, I mean I'm enjoying what I'm doing. So I never want to kind of stop doing whatever. I do a lot of stuff outside of work just because I find it interesting, and the things like the sport. You know, I mentor startup companies. I teach at a couple of universities, business and you know other bits and pieces. That I really enjoy because it's kind of helping. After COVID, the government put this thing in called Help to Grow, and they basically paid 90% of the fees for businesses to start and grow back after COVID, and then they had university lecturers and then people like me who mentored these people and helped advise them on their growth plans. You know, that for me is really interesting, helping and advising businesses contribute to the economy. You know, I do this thing in Scotland called the Global Scot Network, where for free we just mentor these businesses and help them, hopefully help them succeed. So continuing doing that kind of stuff. I do some stuff with the veterans charities and a couple of board advisory type things. Because it's just getting that real life experience, because you've got a lot of good folk, but if you don't have that experience and you can't give a perspective, then maybe not always going to make the right decisions.
No, you're right. And a lot of people need to be pointed in the right direction, don't they?
Yeah, and they need to be told bluntly sometimes, and there's nothing better than a bunch of soldiers to say it as it is.
Well, listen, it's been great having you on. We'll keep abreast of what you're doing.
Thanks, mate.
Hopefully you'll become a friend of the show and the community.
Oh, definitely.
We're trying to build here. And
Yeah.
thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Phil.
Thanks.
Yeah, brilliant.